Welcome to Tech Bites with Ash, where we discuss trends in digital technology that support true business outcomes. I'm Ashu Bhatia, a consultant, an author, and a practitioner of all practical insights on your technology investments.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Tech Bites with Ash. As always, I really appreciate your feedback. I've had a lot of comments coming to me as private DMs, as well as from friends who just called me about some of the content. They really loved some of the data and cloud sessions. As I mentioned, I'm interviewing some people, and I will be, releasing some of those videos. But today, I thought I wanted to definitely talk about, based on some of the recommendations I got from you all, to really talk about how do you do and scale the AI or analytics organization. I took a case study from my work within retail banking, and I thought at least I could provide some of the pointers that would help some of you guys in some of the initiatives that you're doing. So as always, digital strategy, as I mentioned to you, is always about, the customer experience dimension as well as the employee experience. But AI, of course, and analytics is applicable everywhere. There's tons of data being produced internally as well as externally. What do you do with that as an asset, and how you leverage your insights organization to really start using and making some database decisions is going to be dependent on your culture and a couple of things that you try to install and adopt. But needless to say, how do you really scale that? There's one question that people always kind of deal with is, do you keep the organization that is producing analytics these days, especially AI and Gen AI, more central, or do you keep it very federated? Is it a more typical hub and spoke model? There's pros and cons for each one of those models. It all depends on how your lines of business and your organization is laid out. But the key would be trying to understand the pros of having too much of a thick hub where everything is very centralized and going through, an organization or a pod that is doing all these analytics for you. It affects some of the agility, etc. But then also there's some things where they're not as coherent in terms of what you need to be producing. Whereas the other extreme is if it's too much of a thick spoke, which means each organization or line of business has its own almost shadow AI IT organization, right? So then the central organization is merely trying to do more of just guidelines or architecture, areas. But the key would be having somewhere in the middle, the hybrid model, depending on what use cases and which pieces you do. So considering that is key. I wanted to kind of bring to life this example in a retail bank where the business owners were doing, a lot of things, bringing those requests, right, typical to the organization. So lending, service management, contact center, marketing, and you name it, all different business functions, typically bringing a lot of requests to the delivery organization that was the Agile Insights organization. This client had already set up what they called a digital lab, to really try to experiment and innovate. This was more to just prove the value kind of dimension initially, understand what they need to do for data discovery, look at use cases and help them prioritize, and then eventually do a little bit of a go, no go. Never an easy function because you're typically asked to do certain things, but we'll cover some of the parameters and some of the frameworks used to help with this use case prioritization. And then once something really, got a wind of it and the kernel began to kind of germinate, how do you industrialize it? How do you scale that value, right? So once you've proven the value, how do you scale it? What do you do to kind of make this more of an industrialized factory model? What kind of pods do you set up? That's another second piece of that's key. And once all that is being done and you're getting the maturity and you're leveraging some data-driven insights, how do you keep the operations running to really scale and measure that value, right? So the value needs to be going, consistency needs to be happening, whether you do it on your own platform or externally. There's a lot of that pieces that kind of come together to make sure that this organization churns things in. But as I mentioned, the use cases are plentiful. Like these days, when you look at even the pilots that you're doing within your organization for things around agentic AI or Gen AI, which is more cutting edge, or just analytics and AI, every business function has some use cases, whether it's on the functional side, HR, marketing, operations, or it's on the value chain side, whether in a case of banking, is it the onboarding? Is it the servicing people? Is it, the KYC or ML folks? So these use cases are always coming in. The challenge is that you have to do them on a certain, basis to kind of make sure that you're doing the demand management properly. So setting up some kind of function which looks at these use cases, having a little bit of a portfolio manager that is kind of interacting with the business, and then really understanding within a team of data scientists, data engineers, etc., this pod exploring things, doing things in a very agile way. And then really once, as I said, it's done, scaling it and putting it into production is what the organizations who are winning are kind of doing it. As you see on the top, it's definitely a very iterative process. Lots of companies are doing good stuff here, but are imbibing best practices in terms of how they need to roll out and make sure that their business is enabled. So I took an example of how do you prioritize, right? So basically, typical of any exercise that you do, you look at the value. There's different things to measure value. So the business case could be revenue increase, spend reduction, risk mitigation. These days, a lot of sustainability, etc. And then you look at the readiness, right, from tech, data, operations, as well as people. So you do a little bit of a 2x2 to kind of categorize different use cases. For example, in case of a very high readiness, or a very high value, for example, fraud detection, using AI agents for customer support. You can do that, but I know that this typically doesn't work as easily. This could be a good way to just initially sift through the use cases. What I've typically seen is very helpful is doing workshops with your business folks. I'll give you an example. With this bank, for example, there were 65 use cases we took on. Things like member subscription, credit card product recommendations, auto pay alerts, etc. And what we did was we created a very simple spreadsheet, right? Just what is a potential value to a banking customer? What is availability of data? How much action on the ability to act is there on the application layer? And what is the impact of the business? Just a high level score to make certain things objective, right? And then doing a score, you can always do a lot of weighting. You can kind of make this process very complicated, but even a simple spreadsheet with 4 or 5 dimensions to really sift through some of the use cases and show your business together will lead to a lot of good communication. And in this case, for example, when they looked at member satisfaction or income growth or risk management or operational efficiency, we broke the value drivers and we actually helped prioritize these use cases based on what the teams were telling us. And we actually got some of the stakeholders in a room to finally agree, which is, of course, the biggest challenge, to say that this makes sense in terms of what they're rolling out. So the idea of this short tutorial was to just say that you need to kind of work through this thing and really understand how the technology will be implemented and then how will it be leveraged for some of these use cases, right from how the data comes in, how it's stored, and how the application layer will eventually use it to really imbibe and adopt this technology to really leverage it for real business outcomes.
Well, as you saw in this section, the key for a data strategy and bringing analytics and AI into the mix and really embedding it into the application layer where your employees as well as your consumers eventually use it, the key is having that broad strategy, understanding, the whole information lifecycle management of bringing data in, storing it, consuming it, but more importantly, understanding how you will measure the outcomes of what is applied at the application layer. Because a lot of companies do install these systems, they do get some installation, but how do you really determine the outcome of all this work that your technology investments have kind of done? The key would be understanding that and not chasing after all the latest shiny objects, but making sure you understand and listen to the voice of customer so that your data assets within the firm are actually leveraged properly. Thank you so much.